Hey guys, gonna talk about my birth story. My baby's asleep over here, so if there's like a cut or something like that, I'm gonna obviously take care of him if he starts crying. But as I've said in my other videos, I'm not gonna be putting him on camera or showing him or anything like that. Excuse you. So I just thought I would talk about what happened and how the birth went. Everything went well. We were good. But it was really long going in the beginning, which was very stressful because I just kept getting worried that I was going to have a C-section, which I didn't want to have. So we checked into the hospital on the night of March the 30th. We checked in at 7:30 p.m. for an 8 p.m. induction. And I'll start out by saying I was already hungry because they cut me off of food at noon that day, and I don't do well without food. And I didn't understand why they cut me off either, because if I'm being induced, which I was because of high blood pressure, I probably wasn't going to be pushing for like a full 24 hours, and that's a long time to go without food, to go through something so difficult, so physically demanding. I still don't agree with that decision, going without food, but I'll go into that a little more later, like what ended up happening. And we checked in. I was barely a fingertip dilated, and I hadn't been dilated at all at any of my previous appointments. So the plan was to do a medicine called Cytotec, which makes you dilate. Basically, it like softens your cervix so that the baby can come out. And but the problem was, when I got there, I was already having contractions that I didn't know I was having. I couldn't feel them. They were so little, I guess, that were 2 to 3 minutes apart. Like, I was already like having crazy contractions. So what they said was that basically the textbook rules for the drug Cytotec is that if you're having contractions that close together, you can't do the drug. Well, you can, but it's not recommended to do it like textbook wise, but it's still like safe to do it. It just depends on what the particular doctor wants. Now, I was induced that night because my doctor was going to be on call the following day through like for the next 24 hours or something like that. So she wanted to be the one to deliver my baby. Well, that night she wasn't on call yet. So they had to ask the on-call doctor what she wanted to do, who was a different doctor. And she decided to skip the Cytotec and go straight to Pitocin. And Pitocin is a drug that makes you have contractions and makes you go into labor like that. Oh, but first of all, they gave me fluids through an IV for about an hour to see if that would slow the contractions down so they could do the Cytotec, and it didn't. So that doctor decided to do the Pitocin. Now, the next day, another nurse that came in talked to my doctor, and they weren't really pumped about that decision. They would have gone through with the Cytotec, especially considering the whole following day I still wasn't dilating. Like, to force contractions when I wasn't dilated at all, I guess wasn't the best decision for the baby. And now looking back, I'm like, I agree with that. I wish I'd have known that. I would have said that to that doctor, or like communicated it through the nurse. But that's what happened. So they put me on Pitocin around 8:30 or 9 p.m. that night. And we just, checked into the delivery room, got comfortable, watched TV basically. At 11:30 that night, I started to feel the contractions more and more. Now, when I got there, they did let me know that I could have certain foods. Basically, they had me on a liquid diet. So I could have chicken broth, popsicles, Jell-O, and Sprite, I think was what they had there to offer me. So I was like taking up on all of that. So about 11:30, I had some broth, and I'd had Sprite and Jell-O earlier that night because I just wanted to keep my blood sugar up and eat whatever I could. So the contractions started getting stronger, and the problem with my contractions, and I don't know why this happened, because we thought it was the position of the baby at first, but now we know it wasn't. I started having back labor, and back labor sucks. It's like a very painful version of regular labor, I guess. But instead of having the contractions in your stomach, you're having them in your back, like in your lower back up to your middle back and stuff. And oh my God, it was so bad. Like at its worst, my stomach was contracting, and I could feel that on a pain level. Like, you know, they ask you what's your pain from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst. My pain level in my stomach was like a 2. Like I could have gone another 12 hours probably without it being bad, but my pain level in my back was already like at a 9. So at 11:30 that night, I started feeling these back contractions basically, and feeling them a little bit in my stomach. And I decided to try and get some sleep. I did not sleep at all that night. Around 3 a.m. they came in to check me again. And I was 1 centimeter dilated, which you have to get to 10 for the baby's head to come through. And so I was just like barely anything. And the contractions in my back started getting worse and worse. And I was starting to like squirm around in the hospital bed. Talked to the nurse, and because I wasn't dilated very much, they couldn't like basically reach inside of me and feel which way the baby was facing. And they thought he was what they called sunny side up. And I forget what that means. I want to say it means his head down, but his face was facing my stomach rather than my back. And something about that can make you have back labor. Well, he wasn't in that position, so I guess I was just lucky and had back labor for no reason. But they decided, because they didn't know, to try and just lay me in certain positions that would coax the baby to roll around. That sucked because I was just then in uncomfortable positions and having horrible back contractions. And again, these contractions were still 2 to 3 minutes apart. So it was like every 2 to 3 minutes all night I was having them. Then at 6:30 a.m., they came to check me again. I was still only 1 centimeter dilated, and the contractions were so bad at that point from the Pitocin that I had to give in and get an epidural. Now, I knew I was probably going to get an epidural. Like, I had no qualms about having an epidural. I just didn't want to get one so early when I wasn't that dilated, because epidurals can slow down labor. Now, on the other hand, they can relax you enough that your body progresses better. So you never know. It's like 50-50, I guess, if it's going to help you or like slow the labor down. But I was in so much pain. Like the contractions got so bad I could barely breathe during them. Couldn't really talk much during them. And so the nurse was like, if you're going to get an epidural, you know, I would go ahead and get one now while you can sit still enough for one. So we went ahead and got the epidural at 6:30 that morning. So this is almost 12 hours after I've started the Pitocin. And again, I'm still only 1 centimeter dilated. So that's really that was really irritating. At 8 a.m., the nurses came in because they're monitoring my contractions, my heart rate, baby's heart rate, everything on the screen next to me, and then a screen outside, so they can come in if they see anything, you know, happening. At 8 a.m., they noticed that my baby's heart rate was dropping after contractions. Now, during a contraction, apparently that's totally normal because the uterus is literally contracting around the baby, like kind of pushing the baby down and out. So during a contraction, which a contraction will last about a minute or so, like 30 seconds to a minute, it's normal for the baby's heart rate to drop a little bit because of all the pressure that's going on them. But for it to drop after a contraction is a little weird. So they decided to put me on oxygen. So they put an oxygen mask on me and I went to sleep. Now, once the epidural kind of kicked in around like 7 o'clock, I was already asleep anyway. So literally every time after this that they came in, they were waking me up because I was out. I was up all night having back labor, didn't get to sleep until 7 a.m. And then the epidural also kind of makes you a little groggy. So me and my husband just kind of slept all day. We napped all day, which was good because we needed our energy for that night. 8:30 a.m. was when my doctor was then the on-call doctor. So she came to check in at the hospital and did her rounds with her patients. And when she came around to me, she came to check me. And again, I was still 1 centimeter dilated. But she, at that point, I found out the whole thing about they wished that they had done the side attack instead of the Pitocin, blah, blah, blah. And she had told me previously that the original plan was to do the side attack. And then I think then break my water if it hadn't already broken, and then do the Pitocin, or do the Pitocin and then break my water. I forget, you know, I might have flip-flopped that. But she really wanted to break my water because she said in her experience that always does the trick in getting you dilated and ready to push baby out. So even though I was only 1 centimeter dilated, she was like determined to get me like where I needed to be. So she basically just reached up inside me with this like fingertip glove thing on top of her regular glove, and I guess just poked my water bag and broke my water. And speaking of gloves and everything, this entire time, this is during a pandemic, every nurse is wearing a mask and gloves and obviously sanitizing in and out of the room, but they had to like completely be in gloves and mask like 24 hours basically while they were working there. So that was nice, but at the same time, it was weird because I couldn't tell you who my nurses were from a lineup of them. Like, I don't know what they looked like. So it was weird, like, you know, just seeing people in masks the entire time. But I mean, it was great, and I'll go over some of the nurses, the good and bad, at the end of this. So she broke my water, which felt really weird. Basically, just, it wasn't even like you felt like you were peeing yourself. It literally just felt like water was pouring out of your body. And then I had to sit there, and I had a lot of amniotic fluid, which is what your water is. We knew that weeks before I gave birth, that I had a high amount of amniotic fluid. So then I had to basically just sit in the bed and let it drain out. Like at first it kind of like poured out of me, and then they laid like basically those puppy training pads that you get if you're like potty training a dog or house training a dog. They laid those under me and rolled some up and put them like in between my legs and everything. So I just like laid there all day like leaking water basically. And I had the epidural, so I couldn't walk around anyways. So yeah, that was weird feeling, but it felt good because I had less pressure on my stomach. Sorry, I'm reading my notes here. Let me make sure. Okay, so she broke my water at 8:30 that morning. They came back in at 1 p.m. I think it was about 1 p.m. to check me again. And at that point, I was 2 centimeters dilated. So at least I was getting somewhere, but still, I was just very disheartened that nothing was really happening. And the baby's heart rate was still dropping a lot. The contractions were just putting a lot of stress on him. So they had to turn down the level of Pitocin that they were giving me, because throughout the night and morning, they had been slowly turning it up. So they had to back down. And I was like, great, this is like not gonna happen. Then obviously went back to sleep, exhausted. 5 p.m. a nurse comes in to check me. And I remember my husband was like laying on the couch because we were both passed out, and we were just sort of expecting them to be like, yeah, you're still at 2 or maybe 2.5 or something like that. And she reached in to check me, and she was like, all right, you're at 5 centimeters and you're 80% effaced, which is like how thin your cervix wall gets, because it starts like kind of thick, you know, and then it like thins out almost like a paper like consistency. So I was 5 centimeters, 80% effaced. She said, you're officially in active labor. And I remember my husband's head like popping up, like so excited that finally something was happening. So, sorry, I had to use my phone. That was at 5 p.m. 7 p.m. they come in, and I tell them I'm really nauseous, which is a sign that your cervix is dilating, that you're really getting ready to like push. So they decide to go ahead and check me again. And at that point, I am 9.5 centimeters dilated. Like, holy shit. From 1 p.m. being 2 centimeters to 7 p.m. being 9.5. Like, I was so glad that moved that fast. They said my cervix had just a tiny bit left to soften. And that pretty soon it'd be probably time to push. And they were gonna, well, it would be either time to push or time to what they call labor down, which is to sort of let your body naturally push the baby down before you actually start forcing the baby out. But I started feeling his head like move down into my pelvis at that point. So that was around 7. And over the next hour, I started getting the urge to push. Now, I knew that I would have an urge to push. Like, I've heard that before. I didn't know how bad it was going to get. Like, I literally got to the point where I was holding everything together, feeling like I was holding him in. Like, I felt like he was going to fall out of me. It felt like if you've ever had, like, I don't know, like an upset stomach or something like that and been out in public and all of a sudden you had to go to the bathroom and you had to like hold it in. It was like that for like 20 minutes. I mean, it was bad. I was like, oh my God, like I got tired of holding him in, which I wasn't. He wasn't going to fall out. Turns out it took hours to push him out, but that was how it felt. So the nurse had come back in at one point just to, you know, do some regular checks. And I told her, I was like, I have the urge to push like really bad. And she said, okay. She's like, you know, just let me know once it stays that way. Like if that urge doesn't go away, your body's telling you that it's probably time to start pushing. So she left the room then, and literally from that moment on, it didn't go away. So I ended up paging her after a few minutes, and I was like, it's not gone away since you came in to check on me. She said, okay. And she went to check me again, and it was like, she could feel his head down there and everything. And she was like, all right, it's about time to push. So for the first few hours of pushing until he was ready to come out, it was just me, my husband, and my labor nurse. Because it takes a long time to push a baby down. Basically, you have to get their head under the pelvic bone and everything before they start physically coming out of you. So the nurse got us all prepped and ready. She explained, you know, how to push, like how to pull my knees back to my chest, and that basically every time you have a contraction, you're going to take a deep breath, put your chin to your chest and lean forward, and you're going to push and hold your breath for 10 seconds. Take a deep breath, go back in for 10 seconds, take a deep breath, go back in for 10 seconds. You want to push 3 times at each contraction. And my contractions were 1 minute to 2 minutes apart. So that was fucking exhausting. So we started pushing at 8:05 p.m. This is on March the 31st. And it was just really exhausting, obviously. I would go on and off oxygen just to help me breathe and help his little heart rate, because the nurse is watching his heart rate at every contraction. And sometimes, like every once in a while, we would skip a push just to give him a break. I got sick in the middle of it. Like I was like, I'm gonna throw up. This is bad. And they said that was a good sign too. That meant that he was probably coming down really well and that everything was doing what it was supposed to do and he might be coming out soon. But oh my God, it was just exhausting. My husband was fan-fucking-tastic through the whole thing. He like literally held my head up for me during each push. He was counting with the nurse. He was being like, him and the nurse both were like, you know, you got this, you got it, you're doing great. He was ready with like a straw and water or like a wet rag after each push. I mean, it was fantastic. And so I started pushing at 8:05. Sorry, I'm so like distracted. It's hard for me to keep talking. Like I ramble too much. You all know that. So I started pushing at 8:05, and it got to the point where it was just like after each one, I would just like collapse back and just be like, you know, and like dying. Like I wish I could have just fallen asleep in between each one. I was so tired. But so keep pushing. The nurse told us, you know, once it gets really close to time, there's going to be a bunch of people that start coming in and the doctor. So that's what happened. Once it got closer, we had a little trouble getting his head under the pelvic bone. So one nurse came in and literally had to like reach up inside me and turn his little head. That was a major help. Then he was able to get up under the bone. And then they asked us like if we wanted a mirror to see it, and at first we said no, and then I was like, okay, I kind of want to see this shit. They wheeled a mirror in, and my husband was like originally like too freaked out to look at anything. Like he said going in, he's like, I don't really want to look, and I'm like, that's fine, like it's not for everybody. And then he ended up like kind of being like, holy crap, I can't believe that's happening, and he was watching too. So it was pretty cool because we got to see him come out. At 11:06, exactly 3 hours and 1 minute after I started pushing, he finally came out. Right before he came out, I swear it was like the scariest thing in the world because it hurt so bad. Like I had an epidural, but you can still feel a lot. They said I had the perfect epidural, which meant I still had a certain amount of movement and feeling down there while I couldn't feel the contractions. So I felt him come out. It was not fun. But because of that, it was so scary. Like I could see him in the mirror. I could see his little head. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. He's about to come out. But like, it was so exhausting and so painful at that point that each push was terrifying because either I was about to push, be exhausted and go through major pain pushing, and he wasn't going to come out, and then I was going to have to do it again, or he was about to come out and it was going to hurt like hell. Like, either way, it was terrifying. So finally, with like what felt like 6 nurses around me going, you got this, my husband next to me being like, he's almost here, baby, you got it, whatever. Like, finally pushed him out. They had to do a very small episiotomy, which means they cut you just a little bit to help his head come out. But it was really small. I didn't even feel them do it. He came out and we were fine at first. Like, they laid him on my belly and started cleaning him up and stuff. And we weren't like we were happy he was there, and we were just so exhausted. We were just like, oh my God, he's, look at him. That's our baby, whatever. And then, they took him over to the table to clean him up because he was having a little trouble continuing to breathe on his own. He was breathing, and I saw him when he came out. He was looking around before he started breathing, so I knew he was like okay. But then it started getting really stressful because I didn't hear him crying, and like, that's when they're like clearing out their lungs and stuff, is when you hear the baby cry for the first time. So again, we were okay, and then they took the baby and they were communicating with us everything they were doing. They were like, he's good, his heart rate's great, we just want to make sure he starts breathing on his own, blah, blah, blah. And again, we weren't emotional until we heard him cry. When we heard him cry, I started crying because I knew he was okay. I was like, oh my God, he's breathing. And then my husband started crying because he described it really well, in that we've seen ultrasounds, we've seen what he looks like. We felt him for so many months, and it's like we kind of already knew his temperament a little bit because of how he acted in my belly, but hearing him, we didn't know what he sounded like. And when we heard him, it was like we both just lost it. We both started bawling. Then they weren't bringing him back to me right away, so then I started like kind of panicking a little bit, but they again were reassuring me that he was fine. And again, they were communicating everything that happened. They told my husband to come over there so that he could at least see him. And then they weighed him, and he was 7 pounds, 1 ounce, and he was 20.5 inches long. Sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought. Okay, so he was breathing, but they said he wasn't continuing to breathe on his own. So they said, we're gonna bring him over to you and do skin to skin, which is like really good for babies, blood sugar, body temperature, everything. They're gonna let you have skin on skin for a little bit, and then we're gonna take him up to transition, so that we can watch him and make sure that he continues to breathe on his own. So like he doesn't, like to see if he needed to go to NICU or if he was okay to come back and see us. So we did that. We did the skin to skin, and then they took him, and then we were in that room for another hour or two. Got me all cleaned up, stitched up, whatever, started packing our stuff to move to our postpartum room. My husband did. I just laid there. I was exhausted. I wasn't doing anything. Then the other nurse came in and was like, okay, we're going to try and walk you over to the bathroom, see if you can walk. They took my epidural out. After about an hour, let's walk you to the bathroom, see if you can go to the restroom. I did. Everything was good. And then they were like, let's move you upstairs, and the baby, if he's fine, if he's not going to NICU, they'll probably have the baby meet you in your room. So that's what happened labor-wise. Now I want to mention some of the nurses, because like most of our nurses were great, and some of them were just like, we were so confused by them. So the first nurse that we had when we checked in to do like the induction ended up being the nurse that was there to help me deliver through, which was amazing, because when she left after her night shift the first night, she was like, well, I probably won't see you guys again, because most of the time you don't, we would have had the baby by then, but it took so long. She ended up being like back on that shift again. So that was really cool. She was fantastic. She was so nice, so helpful. Like, she was just great. Another nurse that was not our nurse, but we ended up seeing, was kind of a funny story. She had dated my cousin very briefly. Like, they met and, shortly dated for a little while, and then it just kind of fizzled out and didn't work out, and they ended it, like, no big deal. And she worked at this hospital. We knew that like beforehand, but we didn't know that we were going to run into her. Well, my husband ran into her when we were waiting for me to dilate. He like ran out looking for a vending machine and happened to bump into her and said hi. Then she came in to say hi to me, and then she ended up being like the nurse that everybody kept calling in when I was pushing for her expertise. And she was the nurse that actually reached up inside of me and turned his little head to get him under my pelvic bone. Like, it was really funny how involved this girl ended up being in my birth. She came to check on us the next day in our postpartum room because, again, this was during a pandemic, so we couldn't have any visitors. So she was really sweet and actually ended up being really fucking helpful through the whole thing. So I was glad she was there. Let me see. So one weird nurse that we had during the labor part of it, during the delivery part, because we were in a delivery room for the first, I don't know, 29 hours, because it was 27 hours of labor, and then we were in there for 2 hours more, and then they moved us into the postpartum room. So there was one nurse we had shortly, and I don't remember seeing her all that much. And what's funny is she had been teamed up with this other nurse who came in very briefly, and we loved her. We wanted her to stay with us. She was so freaking nice. But her and this other girl had like split up rooms, and the really, really, really nice, good nurse had taken the other rooms, and this nurse I'm about to tell you about had taken our room and a couple others. She came in and like, she mumbled everything. We couldn't understand a word this woman said. Like, I'm not kidding. And I'm not saying that like she had an accent or a speech impediment or anything like that. Like, no, she just came in and kind of didn't have like any kind of personality. And she would come in and be like, I don't know. And we were like, what? And we just kind of like, okay. And she'd like walk out. Like, we don't know what I don't know what she said except for one sentence that she said to me. The whole time. Like, she was there, she was probably my nurse for a good, like, I don't know, 6 hours or something like that. And I had no idea what this woman was ever saying to me. She just came in really quiet. And then at one point, I can't remember if she put me back on oxygen or if the nurse before her had put me on the oxygen, but I was on it and I was, again, sleeping throughout the day. And she would come in and check something, come in, do something on the computer, and every time she mumbled, and me and my husband would look at each other and be like, what the fuck was she saying? She never like introduced herself to us. Like, it was just weird. And every time she came in and left, we were like, what the fuck is happening? Like, this is such a weird nurse compared to every other nurse we've had that's come in and been like, hey, I'm Brittany, I'm gonna take care of you, you know, how's everything going? Do you need anything to eat? Do you need anything to drink? Like, how are you feeling? Like, she didn't say any of that. I mean, maybe she did. I couldn't understand anything she said, but she didn't like look at me, like acknowledge my husband. I mean, it was weird. So she comes in at one point and I'm asleep. And my husband said, like, I'm knocked the fuck out. My husband said she came in and I can't remember, she said something. I don't think she said anything to him, which kind of like irritated him, obviously. But she came in and mumbled something about waking me up, or she just walked over to me, I think. And he said, she's asleep, but I can wake her up if you need me to. Like, he can gently wake me up so I'm not like, you know, awoken by some stranger. And she like didn't acknowledge him and just walked over to me. And he said she was going, mommy, mama, or something like that, like calling me mom, and was like, mama, mama, like trying to wake me up. And all I remember is waking up and this woman being in my face and just being like, you need to take the oxygen off. And my husband said she said it as though I would have known that. Like, they stuck me on oxygen and said to keep it on until they told me to take it off. And she's like, you need to take the oxygen off now. Like, that's literally what I woke up to. And I was like, okay. Like, and he said that's how I reacted. I went like, okay. Like, I don't know who you are and why you're in my fucking face right now. So she pulled the oxygen mask off me, hung it up on the wall, and like left. I mean, and then I looked at him and I was like, what the fuck just happened? Like, I just woke up to her in my face. And he said, I offered to wake you up, and she just didn't even acknowledge me. She just walked up and started waking you up. It was so fucking weird. So then, like I said, the other nurse that she was teamed with, who was like one of our favorite nurses, and I only had her for like an hour, she came in and was so nice. And that woman like followed her back in the room. Like, she was hovering over her or something. And she very clearly was newer than the nicer nurse was, because the nicer nurse was explaining things to her. But it was almost like she was hovering over her, like the nicer nurse was going to be like, hey, did you remember to do this? And that girl wanted to make sure she had her tracks covered or something. It was weird. It wasn't like she was bad. She just like didn't communicate at all. She had no personality and didn't communicate with either of us. So then she was gone, thank God, because I was like, if I'm pushing a kid out and this nurse isn't going to be in here, like, I'm going to lose it. And then we had a couple other nurses that were great. And then, like I said, the original nurse came back in, and she was the one who helped me through labor, and she was fantastic. Then when we went up to the postpartum room, shit got weird again. So another nurse came in after they took the baby. And she was the one that helped me go to the restroom and then wheeled me up to the new room. And my husband came with, carrying all of our stuff. And when she wheeled me up there, she was the one that told us, like, your baby's still in transition. When we get up to the room, they'll probably bring him in to meet you in your room. So we're like, okay. So she wheels us up to the postpartum room and we meet our first postpartum nurse. She was, I can't remember. She just kind of like bluntly said something to that nurse. The nurse who wheeled us up was confused by her and kind of taken aback by her too. She kind of like, as we wheeled past the front desk to go to the room, she just kind of shouted out to that nurse, oh, is that 1708 or whatever our room was? And she's like, what? Yeah, these are the people that are in that room. Like, if that's what you're asking. And she's like, oh, okay, because I'm about to do something. I can't remember what she said. I just remember her kind of shouting something weirdly, like right over us. And we were right there and she was talking about us. So she comes in the room while that nurse is wheeling us in. And she says, well, hold on before you get too comfortable because do you want to go visit your baby first? And we were confused because we were like, I thought he was meeting us here. And she's like, no, he's in transition. And we're like, yeah, we know that. And literally, like, this is how we're kind of talking to her. And the nurse who's wheeled us in is confused as fuck as to what's going on. She's like, okay, you want her to go to the nursery? And she's like, yeah, your baby's in transition. And yeah, we know that. They said that the baby was going to meet us in the room. Is he staying there? Is he going to NICU? Or is he okay? And she wouldn't answer our question. She just kept going, well, he's in transition. And we're like, yeah, we know that. Is he coming in here or not? Like, do we need to go visit him now because he's not coming in here? Like, because he's going to NICU? Like, what the fuck are you telling us? And she still wouldn't answer. And so we were like, okay, yeah, I guess we'll go visit him now because maybe someone in there will fucking tell us what's going on. And then she just kind of awkwardly stood there after we said yes. And the nurse who wheeled us up goes, do you want me to take them in there? And she's like, no, I'm taking them. I just wanted to know. I mean, it was fucking weird. And that nurse was like, okay, well, good luck, you guys. Congratulations. And like left. So then I get back in the wheelchair because I'd gotten out and gotten into bed. So I get back in the wheelchair. My husband puts our stuff down and we start wheeling towards the nursery. And we're both really like off put by this woman at this point. She goes and wheels us into the nursery area. And every nurse in there who still has a mask on, you can see them going like really confused. And one nurse finally goes, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm bringing her in here to see the baby. And she goes, she can't be in here right now. We're not having any parents coming in here right now because it's a fucking pandemic. There's other babies in there. Of course they don't want me and my husband coming in there when there's 5 newborns in that room. And she's like, oh, really? And the woman's confused as to how she didn't know this. She's like, yeah, we're not bringing parents in here. And she was like, I'm sorry, like, to me, like, it was kind of off-putting still the way they all handled it right in front of us. But that woman at least was like, I'm sorry, like, that this was, you know, whatever, like, but we can't have you guys. And I was like, that's fine. Like, I get it. And I said, that's why I was confused as to why we were coming in here in the first place, because I thought he was coming to our room. And I think we asked them at that point, or is he coming into our room? And they didn't even answer us. They were just kind of like, yeah, we have to finish checking him first or something. So we're like, okay, maybe they don't know yet if he's going to NICU. She starts wheeling us back into the room. And she was like, oh, I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize that. And I was like, I kind of like asserted like, well, yeah, that's why I was confused, because they kept telling us he was going to meet us in our room. So after that, she started to be a little bit nicer. Like, I think she kind of realized that she was kind of, I don't know, just being odd to us and that we weren't really feeling it. And then she kept coming into the room. This is at like 2 a.m. at this point. We're exhausted. We're hungry. Like, it's just been a long fucking day. She comes back in the room and she keeps coming in really loudly all night. I mean, she was on shift until, I don't know, like 6 a.m. And all night she just came in like hitting the doorknob so hard that it like jolted both of us awake, which was irritating as hell. But she comes in finally with the baby and she's like, he's doing good. His head's really swollen. He had a really big, like, swollen soft spot on his head until like, I don't know, like a week and a half ago. His head's really swollen, so we're going to keep an eye on that. And she wheels him in and she's like, I'm going to, oh, here's what she asked me first. She says, So his head's swollen and we want to keep an eye on that. So my question to both of you is, how tired are you? Well, I just went through 27 hours of labor and 3 hours of pushing a fucking baby out of me. So I'm pretty fucking tired. What do you, like, what? And I was like, in context to what? Like, I'm tired. Like, what is your question? And she's like, well, we have to keep an eye on his head. So do you want us to do it for you, or do you guys want to stay up and watch him? And I was like, I mean, and I looked at my husband like I didn't understand. He's like, yeah, we're pretty tired. Like, like, you want us to take shifts sleeping, or what are you saying? And I said, you know what? I think we'd rather just have you guys watch him, because then it's like a full nursing staff watching him. And we're not worried that we're both going to accidentally fall asleep. And I don't even know what they wanted us to watch. Like, his head's swollen. What are you asking us to watch? Because the nurses would come in and keep measuring his head. Are you saying that you're worried he's going to stop breathing again because of something to do with his head? Like, it wasn't clear what even we were supposed to be watching. So we said, yeah, like, I guess the safest thing would be for him to go to the nursery, because we're both just completely exhausted and we need to get a couple hours of sleep. Otherwise, we're going to pass out watching him. So she's like, okay, that's fine. I'll leave him in here for an hour so that you can try and feed him and you guys can have some time with him, and then I'll take him back to the nursery. And we're like, okay. And she had told us before she brought him in too, she asked me, are you planning to breastfeed or are you doing formula? And I said, I want to breastfeed. She's like, okay, great. When I bring him in here, we'll see if he can feed. Like, in my mind, I'm thinking you're going to like help me or at least watch him latch or something. When she brings him in and asks that question about how tired are we? And then she's like, okay, I'm gonna leave him in here for an hour. She just starts to leave. And I'm like, okay, so should I try and feed him now? Like, I've never had a baby before. I don't know like anything about breastfeeding. And she's like, yeah, try and feed him. And then she leaves. And I'm like, okay, I'll just figure this out on my own. Thank you for the help. And there was like pamphlets there about breastfeeding and stuff. So I like opened those, and luckily I'd like researched it beforehand. So I knew like how to like do certain things. But again, I'm completely new to this. I don't know if my baby's going to be any good at latching. I don't know if there's some tricks the nurses know I don't, which there was. But she just leaves. So I'm like, okay, so I pick him up and just start trying to breastfeed him, which luckily he did really well almost immediately. And then she comes back in after the hour and she's like, okay, let's go over some stuff. And she like takes the pamphlets and like breezes through them really quick. She's like, okay, so this page is telling you this. This page is just helpful about this. This page is like the cafeteria information. And it was really weird. Like, the whole time she was there, we were just really off put by her. So then that happened. And then we had a couple more nurses because we were there for 2 days. And then she asked to, like, one of her first questions to us was, are you guys checking out early? And we were like, what? And she was like, are you guys leaving early? Like, are you planning on leaving tomorrow? And I was like, I don't know. Like, my baby still hadn't come back to the room yet. I don't even know if he's going to be like a NICU or something. I have no fucking clue. Like, I didn't know checking out early was an option. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how my health is and his health is, you know, over the next 12 hours. I don't know what's going on. So that was just really weird. Again, we had a couple more nurses, and then our last nurse that we had there was actually a friend of a friend. So someone that my husband works for knew one of the nurses at this hospital, and she ended up being our last nurse there through checkout. Oh my God, she was amazing. Her and the nurse prior to her were like our favorite. They were so helpful, so amazing. Like, they both came in and would check on him, and if they took him to the nursery for a little bit, like if he needed, like he had to go for circumcision, he had to go for vaccination, like different things like that. And then, you know, some of it they did in the room. They would be like, is there like a little outfit you want us to put on him? Or like one nurse like put all of his like first hat and everything that he wore that was like hospital issued in a little baggie for us that said baby's first hat. Like, they were so amazing. So that was fantastic, because after that first postpartum, like going from the labor room where everyone was so nice and helpful besides Miss Mumble Nurse, to the postpartum room was like day and night. I mean, we went from like having the most amazing, like personable nurses to that first woman that was just like, it was weird. So having those 2 nurses back to back that were so amazing was fantastic. I mean, we couldn't ask for something better to change it around because we were really not feeling the first nurse. And then the second nurse that came in after her, she was okay. There wasn't anything terrible about her, wasn't anything great about her. I mean, like, not that she has to be great, but, you know, like, you've just gone through this big moment in your life. You kind of, like, hope to have someone personable and someone who's really good with people. So the second nurse was just kind of, like, average. I don't even remember much about her, but the last two were so nice. So that was amazing. So, yeah, everything went great. We're doing great. Obviously exhausted. Obviously each night is different. Some nights he sleeps great, and some nights he's like got us just pulling our hair out a little bit, but he's so cute. You can't really be mad at him. He's doing really good. He's gaining weight really well. He's eating really well. Yeah, I couldn't ask for a better situation, really. And as hard as it's been going through this with like quarantine going on, the silver lining for us is that my husband's been able to be home to help me over these past few weeks, because if I had to do a lot of this by myself during the day and stuff, I think it would have been a lot harder. So that's been amazing. But yeah, so that is the story of my labor and how all that went. And hopefully next week I'll have a true crime video up for you guys. I hope you liked this video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up. Let's see if I remember my outro. It's been like 6 weeks since I filmed anything. If you guys have any suggestions for videos, true crime or otherwise, please leave those in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos, please hit the subscribe button. I got those two backwards. Other than that, I will see you guys next week.